Hello, everyone. Welcome to another one of our webinars on this cold fall day in Toronto. Hopefully, you're staying dry and warm. We're going to wait a couple minutes for people to join. There might be other stuff going on. We understand today's Remembrance Day. And while we wait for everyone to join, do us a favor, as always, go into the chat to just make sure it works. Put in your name, your company's name if you want, and where you're joining us from. If you're joining us right now, please go to the chat. I just want to make sure it does work because we're going to use it throughout the process. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Ben, glad to have you on board. Piero, thank you. Anyone else? Everyone from Toronto so far. Mohammed, good to have you on board. Tushar, perfect. Think architecture. Larry, Scarborough, Mohammed is from Scarborough. Stephen Street. We have Stephen Street on board, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't know him, you need to know him. He's a celebrity. Thank you, Stephen, for being here. Berat, thank you for being here. Okay, so as is our norm for these webinars, we like to start our conversations with asking you, the audience, a few questions that would basically help us hopefully tailor to the needs of this audience to a certain extent, obviously. So the first question, which it would be great if you go to your chatbot and chat box and answer is, what is your role in the project? And if it's none of those, please put your role in the chat box. Okay. Perfect. We have developers, consultants are the most, which is great. We need to have decision makers, and people who can support good decisions with relation to these projects. So it's good to have consultants here. So here's the second question. Why are you even here? Why are you here today? Why are you interested in mass timber? What's your main reason in terms of considering mass timber for your next project? Give us a couple pointers. If there's anything that's outside of those notes that we have on the screen, please put it in the chat box. Design, sustainability, cost savings, sustainability. Okay. Sustainability seems to be leading with design. Okay, good. So no one's here because they think they're going to get schedule savings from mass timber. That's a good one. Okay, we're going to talk about that. You're not necessarily wrong, but there's argument to be made both sides. Okay, the third question. Now that we've established that everyone loves mass timber and thinks it's a good idea to have it, why haven't you used it so far? What is your main obstacle? What is your main reason or concern for not using mass timber? If the answer is not in the options, please put it in the chat box and we'll go through it a little bit later. Industry readiness. So you don't think the industry is ready enough. Okay, cost, fire rating, not big of a concern. Perfect. Okay, so I think that's that's a little bit different than I would have expected, but I appreciate you guys answering those questions. So here's where we are. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, this is not a sales pitch for mass timber. And Stephen, thank you for being here, but I'm not going to just do a sales pitch for mass timber. But here's how this webinar came to be. I had two questions, and those two questions kept coming up to us as someone who has had the privilege and opportunity of working on a mass timber project. Is mass timber the right product for your next project? How do we tell if that's the case? How do we gauge? What's the framework? How do we make that decision? That was a question that I was getting over and over. And the second one was, okay, we have decided that we want to use mass timber on the next project. How do we minimize our risks? How do we learn from the other people in the industry? What are the big things we need to watch out for? So these questions kept coming up. And at some point in time, I'm like, we have to put together something to answer them. So I went to the two of the smartest and most experienced people that I know, and I've had the pleasure of working and talking to quite a bit. And here we are with this webinar. So I'll turn it over to them. We'll start with Matt. Matt, why don't you give us a quick introduction, and then we'll go to Kristen.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to try to make sure I speak loud enough here, so please interrupt me if I'm mumbling or trailing off. Matt Boland from McCallum Sather. I'm technically in our Hamilton office here today, but we also have offices in Kitchener as well as Toronto. We're working, primarily in the Southwestern Ontario area, but are expanding nationally across and are doing work in the east, in the north, up in Iqaluit, as well as some projects in the west. So our firm and my work has always been rooted in sustainability and innovation. So how can we couple those two things together to find really interesting solutions? And it's at that crossroad where we've had some experience with mass timber and been able to successfully execute some projects with mass timber. So I'll be talking about that today, as well as our journey moving forward.
Thank you. And before I go to Kristen, I have to add that when 3.5 years ago the code changed and it started allowing more mass timber to be introduced into high-rise buildings, one of the first calls I had made was to Stephen, who's on the webinar today, and he basically told me, talk to Matt. He's the North Pole. He knows what he's doing, and he's way ahead of everyone else. So I'm very happy to have you, Matt, here. And Kristen joins us from New York City right now. She has a whole bunch of experience for probably a decade and a half. Please elaborate on that, Kristen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Slavin. I have a consulting business called Conifer Advising. I have been working exclusively in mass timber since 2014, so just under a decade and a half, but over a decade. I have practiced architecture development. I've been on the GC side, and then for the last 5 years prior to this consulting business was doing prefab manufacturing using mass timber. So I've got quite a breadth of experience with mass timber, and I've been working exclusively with it for 11 plus years. And now I'm bringing that experience across the value chain, as well as with successful projects, to teams that might be looking to do mass timber for the first time, or maybe not even for the first time, but would like to make it a little bit easier on themselves to learn from my lessons, from my past history, and from others. I should say I am in New York City. I'm American, but I have experience across Canada as well. I was working at Intelligent City for a little over 2 years, working on projects in Vancouver and Toronto, one of which was with PIAM. So my perspective will come from both sides of the border, but as we know, there's borders are lines on maps, and trees don't care what that border means. So I do think that a lot of the experience is relevant.
Thank you, Kristen. I know I've used your experiences from your south of the border projects, and when you and I were working together. So I'm hoping that we can transfer a whole bunch of that to our audience today. And for those of you whom I have the pleasure of meeting for the first time, my name is Payam Nursalahi. I run a company called Dena Project Management, which is a construction and project management firm. We deal with real estate developers pretty much from A to Z or at any point in between when they need help with construction or project management. And we run the midrise.ca website, which is the website dedicated to providing resources to people who work in the midrise section, which we believe to be a very critical section of the market. We also run the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks, and we're more than happy to have you on board here. My experience in this realm, the mass timber, comes from 2.5 years of working on this project in Tobico. It's a 60 units, 9-story mass timber project, prefabricated, modular, and the project belongs to Windmill Development and Leader Lane. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Great, thank you, Payam. So I am going to give you a sort of high-level considerations for the questions that Payam posed, which is how you decide if mass timber is right for your project or maybe right for your project, and if so, what do you need to consider to make it a success? So the first question, how do you even know if it might be the right thing for you? There's a number of considerations that I'm going to put forth that are, across that value chain, and trying to draw on the experience that I've had to make sure that the project team and developers are considering mass timber from all angles and the project from all angles. So we'll talk about design and massing, which is usually where people start. We'll also talk about hard cost considerations, including holistic cost analysis and material deposit schedule. We'll look at schedule. I know it sounds like most of you didn't have that as a priority for why you're here, but it is something that can impact the project in a positive way. We'll look at soft cost considerations as well, and then incentives and feasibility analysis. So starting with design and massing, in general, if you're thinking about mass timber, the place to start is, does my building look like a Frank Gehry building, or does it look like a normal building? If you're trying to do something extremely curvy or with a lot of cantilevers and very complicated massing, mass timber is no different than any other material. It will be less efficient than something that's maybe a little bit more straightforward. So you could certainly use mass timber, but if you're a cost conscious project, like most projects are, then reducing cantilevers, curves, and setbacks will increase that structural efficiency. Within mass timber, the fiber cost drives the cost of the mass timber package. So reducing fiber by increasing structural efficiency is going to be key. And that does also include waste. So when you see a lot of curves and other shapes, know that mass timber panels come out in rectangles. So the more rectangular your building, the more efficient you're going to be able to use that panel, and you will pay for the waste and will have a direct impact on the cost. So first and foremost, from a very early stage, you can kind of see, is your site or is your project design or the project initiatives enabling mass timber to be cost effective? So hard costs is also, a big consideration, not just in terms of, will this cost more, but in terms of when you spend your money. So looking at, as I mentioned, the mass timber package, Swinnerton down in the US actually did a sort of turnkey package analysis and what that cost looks like. And 64% of their package cost was material alone. So again, if you're looking at just the cost of material of the mass timber for an efficient design, the more efficient you can make it, the lower that cost will be. And it will, far outweigh a lot of the other impacts on that mass timber package. However, when you're considering mass timber compared to concrete or steel, you really should be doing a whole building life cycle cost assessment, because the structure to structure comparison may show that the wood is, maybe slightly more expensive, maybe 5% more expensive than the concrete. But when you consider additional aspects of the building, like finishing materials, reductions in, drywall, if you're using the mass timber as your fire rating solution, on-site labor, construction schedule savings, and the associated carrying costs with that, as well as ongoing costs for operations, if you're using a more efficient or less conductive material like wood, then you should be seeing at least cost parity with a lot of concrete and steel buildings in that mid to high rise range. Additionally, you should think about the material deposit schedule. And this is actually true for any prefab system. It's not just mass timber, but because mass timber is prefabricated by nature, you will have to pay that deposit earlier in the construction process than you might with a site poured concrete, for example. Manufacturers typically require a fairly significant deposit, maybe 25% plus, to lock in their fiber costs and hold space in their manufacturing line for you. And that can result, or will probably result, in an earlier capital outlay. So if you're the developer thinking about, when do I need financing, or how am I going to pay for this? Is it equity or is it a loan? Think about that material deposit schedule and how it aligns with the construction schedule, because it could impact that.
Sorry, Kristen, just before you move forward, I'm gonna emphasize that point a little bit more, because, like, as you mentioned, this is just not mass timber. It's any prefabricated system that will basically be done offsite. You will have that situation. And for those of you who have been involved in draw financing, traditional draw financing for construction process, this is significantly out of sequence. So it's a very important point to be prepared to finance that 6 to 8 months potentially ahead of time outside of your draw to pay for deposits. Thank you.
Thanks, Payam. And I know this seems like it's getting into the weeds, but if you're thinking about, is mass timber right for my project, and you have a very traditional draw schedule and you just can't push that forward, then this might not be the right solution for you, or prefab generally might not be. or you should think about, how can we think about this financing differently? From a schedule and site constraint perspective, again, mass timber is prefabricated by nature. And so the on-site construction time savings should be there if you're well coordinated and you're well sequenced. In this example on the slide here, this is a project that I did in Portland, Oregon, and we actually did a time lapse of the level 2 post-tension concrete slab, including all of the tensioning that's required in the rebar, etc., versus level 4, which is the same size floor plate on the same building, same site. And the difference there was 16 days for concrete versus 10 days for the mass timber. And I should say the mass timber, the level 4 included the light frame walls, not just the mass timber aspects. And those light frame walls were site built. So if those walls had been prefabricated, those alone took 8 of the 10 days. Those could have also, seen significant savings on the on-site schedule as compared to the concrete. The other thing you'll notice is if you can, zoom in, we will be sharing the presentation later, I think. It's a question in the chat, but you can zoom in. There's at least double the amount of people on site for the concrete portion versus the mass timber side of it. So there's a big on-site labor savings and sort of coordination on-site savings there. And then additionally, we, on the left-hand side, you can see the concrete required us to close down that side street in the neighborhood because of the pour schedule and the size of the slab. So we just needed those concrete trucks to have access to that side of the building through the whole day. Whereas on the mass timber side, we actually, for the rest of all of that construction, we did not have to close down any streets. We closed one lane on the side street there, but the street itself remained open. So there was less disruption to the neighborhood and less complication with sort of access. Considering soft costs for whether or not you want to venture down the mass timber road is also important because once again, the prefabrication aspect, mass timber really shines on site when you have everything pre-coordinated. And so that includes not only the structure, of course, it is the structure, but also the MEP, the fire stopping, all of the details that go into that building will affect that mass timber package. And that will significantly reduce headaches on site. So knowing that you need that level of coordination in design means that you will also need to pay for that level of coordination as the developer. You will need to likely pay either the GC and or the manufacturer for some amount of pre-construction effort. On the left, you can see Nordique out of Quebec. They have some pre-design and sort of optimization services. Those are definitely worth paying for because it significantly reduces complication down the road, but it is a soft cost that is upfront that you need to consider. The other soft cost, one of the other soft cost aspects to think about is insurance. Builder's risk insurance in particular has a premium compared to concrete and steel or other non-combustible building types. And this is changing pretty rapidly, but because insurers use past projects to build out their database on projects, and there just isn't that much history with mass timber construction generally in North America, there's not as much data for them to base this on. So we're seeing anywhere from 10% to 800% premium increases on builder's risk insurance compared to concrete. It completely depends on project size, the amount of timber in the project, the protection measures that you're doing during construction and after the fact, location, the broker. There's a lot of variables to this, and there are carriers like Zurich and Chubb and others that have actually put together mass timber specific programs to ensure mass timber buildings and make sure that it's being done well and for less of a premium than others. But it is something to consider and something to work with early with your insurers in the project, and that also might affect your team composition.
And sorry, Chris, just before you pass on that slide, I want to make two quick notes on the insurance part. At least from anecdotal stories that we hear in the market and what I've been exposed to, is that the insurance market has been moving forward. So the premiums have been getting better, as you mentioned, because we have more projects now in Ontario and Toronto with mass timber. And the fact that at the end of the day, if you compare mass timber to
the actual stick frame or 2x4s that you can pick up from Home Depot, this is significantly more fire resistant. It's not going to burn down as fast by any means. It has charring requirements, so that's showing itself in the insurance premium. So I would agree with you that probably for the foreseeable future, insurance premiums are going to still be more expensive than concrete, but per se, they will be even potentially even cheaper than the stick frame. And I just want to also make a note on that AEC and soft cost composition that you made. That's absolutely true. That was definitely my experience, that we spent way more time in coordination. But frankly, if you don't do that, then you're just not picking up the benefits of having this prefabricated and modular system in place. And be it mass timber or not, you need to spend that upfront time to get the benefit. Thank you.
It's a quick question about how much have premiums dropped in percentage. And a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing now is, it's not 800%, right? It's maybe a 30% premium or something relative to concrete. So it's come down quite a lot. But again, it really depends on who your insurer is, where you are, what your project team looks like, and essentially how much confidence the insurer has that your team will be able to pull this off with as little risk as possible to them. I've also experienced and heard of teams, including general contractors in particular, working with those insurers through the early stages of the project to implement construction protection measures to actually reduce that premium. So while they might quote an additional premium, work with your team to see if there's anything that you can do to help appease that insurer to reduce, their risk exposure. There are incentives. So some of that was, maybe negative impacts of mass timber that you need to think about. But there are also some positive impacts that are, really kind of starting to come to the forefront in more, climate-focused jurisdictions. So one example is some zoning incentives that Vancouver has put into place, where they're allowing for additional height and density for mass timber and rezoning applications. So that's a direct benefit to the development if you're able to get more yield out of that site just by using mass timber versus concrete or steel. In non-rezoning situations, they're also allowing additional stories, additional height, additional support in sort of that pre-application stage. And this is, Vancouver often leads the way when it comes to mass timber. And so they're, again, leading the way in the zoning incentives, but this is also starting to become true in other places like Seattle and California and other places. So definitely, as part of your initial study of whether or not mass timber is right for you, start to look at those incentives and see what you might be able to find that could help offset or even, surpass some of the other possibly cost premiums or negatives that you might think in your head would be true of mass timber. Additional incentive types include policy-related considerations. So there's wood first policies that exist, again, in British Columbia for public projects that really help promote both the use of mass timber, but also the knowledge base. And then capital access incentives. For example, One Planet Living Real Estate Impact Fund is a real estate fund that helps fund real estate projects. They have specific ESG requirements. You can see the categories here on the left, including health and happiness, culture and community, land and nature, sustainable water, etc. One of them is materials and products. And so using mass timber might actually open up access to certain capital sources that you might not otherwise have as a project team or as a developer. You could look at grants and other funding that wouldn't otherwise be available for concrete and steel. So finally, thinking about, is mass timber right for me? Think about all those things and ultimately pull that into a feasibility analysis that is specific to mass timber, and try not to do, a general massing that, you would do for concrete or steel and then slot mass timber into it. The more you can make the project efficient for mass timber in terms of the grid spacing, design details, cantilevers, etc., the better off you'll be looking at how efficient you can make that and how applicable mass timber might be for your project. Also determine your project priorities and key decision-making drivers. So think, at the very beginning, how am I going to make hard decisions when it comes to project budget, schedule, design decisions, etc., and be clear with the team about what those priorities are, and then see how Masstimber might be able to solve that for you or help solve it for you. But having those priorities clear will help you make these decisions all along the way. Other considerations like laying out the building program to account for MEP efficiency, acoustics, etc., will also be important in that process. And then getting cost feedback from a CM or GC with Masstimber experience is critical, because there's a bunch of other things that we'll talk about once you decided to go down that road that they will have in the back of their head as they're giving you that cost feedback. And or Masstimber manufacturers as well are often able to give you rough order of magnitude costing early so that you can make sure that your project is in line with your expectations.
If I may add my 2 cents to that, we've looked at probably half a dozen different projects over the past couple of years in terms of projects that were designed by concrete for concrete or steel, and they were trying to superimpose mass timber on them. Frankly, none of them really panned out because it just the layouts were the changes, the shear wall locations, and everything was just too different. So going back to what Kristen said, I can definitely agree with us having to kind of start with the mass timber if that's the decision to go through. And the second part is, to be honest with you, and I don't think Matt or Kristen would disagree with me, that mass timber is on a learning curve. We are all learning as an industry. So the sooner you bring in the team together, it definitely helps. The costing side definitely helps the design side and minimize your mistakes. Thank you.
Thanks, Payam. Okay, so you've been through that process and you've decided Masstimber might be right for you. How do you then go forward and minimize your risks and learn from past experiences of others on the team? So there are design considerations, one of which is obviously structural. This is the primary consideration people really think about, but as you can see in the examples from projects that I've worked on, there's a number of different, even just down to like structural connection types that you need to take into account. So really thinking about what do you want your project to look like? How do you want to deal with fire? And therefore, how do you want to deal with these structural connections is one of those first sort of high impact decisions. The structural connections will often come with the mass timber package. So you can see in a lot of these, they're pre-installed onto the mass timber, the beams or columns, and then that enables just this sort of assembly approach on site, which gets you a lot of that cost savings. But in order to do that, you need to make that decision early and really understand what that cost and sort of decision-making implication is for you. A lot of connections are custom designed, so you'll work, with your structural engineer and get a steel shop to make them and have them shipped to your mass timber manufacturer and put in place. But there are a growing number of connectors that are also off the shelf that have certifications in place and are available to use, but they're proprietary. So making that decision early is something that should be done to make this as seamless as possible and really simplify further sort of downstream design decisions. Acoustics is another design decision or detail that really needs to be thought about. In particular, are you going to try to leave your ceiling exposed if you're using mass timber panels? Usually that's what people try to do because it looks really nice. It reduces additional material costs like drywall and paint. But that does have an impact on acoustics. So if you don't have a ceiling dropped below your mass timber, you're dealing with all of your acoustics above the slab. So how do you want to do that and work with your design team to make sure that your performance expectations are met using the design approach that you're taking? The same thing is true with walls. You want to control for acoustics between units, for example, in residential or in flanking around sort of the exterior and those details. And often CLT or mass timber panels will span between multiple units, which means you also have to think about vibration and how that sound transfers from one unit to the other. So there is a growing database of acoustics and fire assemblies, but it's something to consider early for how you want to deal with this, because as you can imagine, the more layers you start to add, the more costly it will get. The same thing is true with fire resistance and expansion considerations. So all of those joints between things, especially between units, will have to be fire rated. thinking about how you want to deal with the fire rating on the wood structure itself. There's often there's these sort of different levels depending on how tall your building is and how large it is, as to how much you actually have to cover up with drywall or some other material. And so that will impact how you deal with the fire resistance rating of your structure. But it's not just the structure, it's also things like the slab edge to curtain wall details, penetrations, things like that. And companies like Hilti are really starting to, again, build out these databases for you to pull on, but often there are situations where maybe there isn't a test for that and you have to get engineering judgments or work with your jurisdiction to figure out what the best solution is for you. And then finally, on the design consideration side, think about finishing. The mass timber is beautiful. It's like almost doesn't even matter like where it started. It always looks good, but you do have to think about how you want to protect that on the site and make sure it's finished well in the end building. So an example here from a project that I did again in Portland, 2 projects. One was we had it pre-coated in the factory using this JFB Heart coating, and the way that we tested it was actually flipping red wine upside down on the panel for like a week, and then moving it and trying to rub it off and seeing how much it absorbed past that coating, because we knew that on site there's just going to be dirt and metal and all sorts of stuff that could really impact the look of that mass timber. And in the end, this was the coating that performed best, so that's what we did before it even got installed. The other consideration for finishing is looking at, in the lower left-hand corner there, what your MEP looks like if you've got exposed ceilings and you don't want to go through a bunch of hoops to hide it. So in this case, the sprinklers and a couple of electrical conduits were going to be left exposed in the unit. So we made sure that they were made with, metal instead of PVC or some other material, and then painted out white so that it sort of blended in with the aesthetics without, going through a lot of hurdles to try to shove them into walls and things like that. But again, that's sort of project specific. Just be aware that you need to think about these things. Quickly, I'll go through supplier options and some considerations to think about for that. North America is really large, and there's a number of manufacturers across North America. In Canada, you've got sort of a better distribution than we do in the United States, but think about where you're getting your timber from, because they all have different press sizes, they have different layup options, different species that will impact the structural capability of that panel. And essentially, the lower the structural value, the more wood you'll have to use. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's just sort of a trade-off on the species you're looking for and the location you're looking for and the size you're looking for. From a species perspective, it is also important to think about that, not just structurally, but from an aesthetic point of view. Doug fir is really orange. If you whitewash it, it goes pink. Is that the look that you want? Or would you rather go use an SPF that's maybe a little bit more yellow, or a spruce like Nordic uses, which is a very light sort of white color? So the cost, the aesthetics, the spans, all of that should be taken into consideration. In addition to the product that people offer, that the manufacturers offer, there's also differences in lead times, costs, and services that they provide. This is an excerpt from a 2025 Pacific Northwest specific regional mass timber market study that I just completed. And so this is not comprehensive across the continent for all manufacturers, but you can see there's quite a range of participants in the mass timber industry, everywhere from commodity mass timber into project mass timber, down through into fabrication and prefab. And so depending on your team's experience, your expectation around the manufacturer services that they're going to be providing in pre-construction and through construction, this is something to take into account, because not all manufacturers offer the same level of service across the board. So you might be able to get away with maybe a lower service manufacturer if you have a really experienced architectural engineering team that can take up some of that slack for the detailing and modeling. And then transportation and logistics is obviously a huge one when you're trying to pick a supplier or look at options. This is looking at across North America in 2024 where projects got their mass timber from. And you can see Canada does a pretty good job at getting Canadian timber. But along the east coast of the United States, for example, a lot of it's coming from Europe, because there isn't really necessarily that full service supplier with the species people want within an easy trucking distance from these projects. So trucking and logistics is important if you think about, you're in construction, and if a panel comes damaged and you need it remade and you're trying to get it from Europe, you have to think about what that means in terms of shipping, getting it through customs, getting it onto site, etc. It can really add up, and it might delay the project. But if you've got early coordination and you're working with your suppliers to mitigate those risks, then there's ways to help with that. But it is a consideration that you should make for sure. And then a couple last slides here on construction considerations. I'm sure Payam can chime in better than I can on these, but schedule and sequencing is a big one. If you're going to try to get those schedule savings, then you need to think about how that timber is sequenced on your truck. And usually the manufacturers will be able to do this, but it also depends on your project. If you are trying to do just-in-time delivery, then those panels that are coming for that floor on that given day need to be ordered in the right order so that you can install them with one pick off the truck and reduce your time in sort of dealing with that the logistics on site. If you're trying to store that mass timber on or off site, then you have to consider the double handling that it will take and sequencing all of those pieces within that storage location, as well as protecting that wood. The other scheduling aspect of this is really looking at those follow-on trades. There's a good advantage to mass timber in that you don't have shoring in your building. Once the concrete is poured, for example, you still have shoring in the way and you can't get people in there. But something to consider is that there are a bunch of construction provisions that might impact how you sequence your sub trades. So fire stopping is a great example of this. There's often fire stopping requirements as you're going up the building in construction with mass timber. So you have to bring your fire stopping subcontractor in multiple times over the course of the structure rather than at the end all at once. And so that's just something to know and to consider as you're doing that construction planning. Moisture management is a big deal. The wood will get wet. It is going to be outside and it will rain even if you don't want it to. In this project, we were doing our framing in the middle of winter in the Pacific Northwest. So it rained every single day and it was, pretty miserable. The wood will also dry out. So as long as you are monitoring that moisture, actively having people, mop off, if it's like really starting to pour and pool, having people mop it off and coming up with a good moisture management plan with your GC ahead of time, then you can manage that. But it is something that needs to be considered and it will impact the construction. So you can see here, we taped the seams and then I went through that project every week for weeks, monitoring that moisture, taking moisture readings of the mass timber so that before we encapsulated it on the top with concrete, we knew that the wood was dried out to the appropriate level so that we wouldn't have any issues down the road with the structure. So this is a consideration that needs to be taken into account during construction and in that construction planning for labor. And then finally, those construction code requirements that I mentioned, they're different depending on where you are. So you'll have to look at your own code and talk to your own jurisdiction. I'm in New York City. Things here are relatively extreme when it comes to, in particular, the fire department's concern around mass timber. And so I've pulled some examples here, but some of the examples that, are due to the building being mass timber, but might not even impact mass timber directly, but definitely impact the project, are things like they want the permanent interior exit stairs and the closures with their permanent fireproofing measures in place at least 2 floors above the topmost working deck or to their full height. So when you think about how am I going to make this stair, and you think, oh, well, we'll just wrap, steel core and drywall, think that like that will be out in the weather the entire time in construction before you have a roof on, because it has to be before you even get wood on site. So it might impact how you design your cores. It might impact how you sequence things. As I mentioned, the fire stopping is often a really big one. There's other considerations, like in New York, you're only allowed to store 54 cubic meters of mass timber on site at any given time. So if you're trying to do on-site storage, that might be a hurdle for you. So looking at all of these provisions, working with your construction team to plan for them, and then possibly working with your jurisdiction to help mitigate some of the more negative impacts of the construction process will all be key for success. And I will stop there and pass it on to Matt.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Let's go to Matt for sake of time. I'm just going to bring up your slide there, Matt.
Sure. While we're syncing that up, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
Perfect.
There was a couple questions that came through. Chris, I'm not sure if you were tracking them. One of them was a height limit for structure before a rating of the wood structure is a requirement, which is a good question, but it's not necessarily a clean, simple answer. And the reality is that the the mass timber itself can have a rating and can get, basically you just increase the thickness and the rating goes up. There is, though, provisions, and I won't speak maybe because I think it obviously changes in different jurisdictions. But then there's the next piece is the encapsulation requirement, which does come in at various heights. I believe we're now, Ontario is it 18?
I think we're at 18. Stephen might be able to
Stephen would know, yeah, for sure. So that's where you get requirements around encapsulation. So I mean, those things are things we need to consider. Yeah. Great. Okay.
Go ahead, Matt. It's all yours.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. So first of all, I just want to say thanks again to Payam for having us on here. You've been a great resource and champion and advocate for actually connecting a lot of people. So even though you said 3.5 years ago, you reached out to me because of I had stumbled upon some projects and got some stuff done. I've that you've repaid that debt in full plus in terms of connections and different resources and different projects experience that you have. So thank you to you for that. Also great and pleasure to be here with Kristen as well. I have taken some liberties, as you can see with my title on the title for the webinar today of how to successfully use mass timber in your next project. And I've just inserted housing in there. For myself, I am, at McCallum Sather, we do a lot of different things, a lot of different scopes. We have basically 4 different thought centers where we focus. But most of my work has been geared for a lot of my career around housing and also in commercial office. And as some of us know, office isn't quite what it used to be. So housing is definitely a place where right now we're putting a lot of focus. Before I get into that, though, just from a mission and vision standpoint, as I mentioned in the intro, that is a big part of us in terms of being innovators of sustainable design and collaborative construction. That's something that we really take quite seriously and are always coming back to in terms of not only the work we do, but who we do the work with. And that we try to have that permeate everything we're doing. And just in terms of a quick outline of what I want to get through here today, and I will try to be as to the point as possible so we can get on track and get everybody on their way, hopefully with a little time for questions. So number one, just want to talk a little bit about the current context, again, what we're doing, a bit upon our journey, as architects, working in this space and looking to realize mass timber, some of the partnerships and lessons learned that we've had, and then next steps or future directions, whatever we want to call it, in terms of things we're excited about moving forward on into the future now. So again, current context for us, I mean, mass timber has been something that's been on my radar for probably the better part of 15 or 20 years. As most of us know, it's a European technology that's come over. But one of the great and amazing things about it, and I was actually on a trip to the north, I think it was last year, to tour some of our Ontario forests and really start to see that cross section of the vertical integration of where, how sustainable forestry starts and how these value add products such as mass timber can be such great and key value adds to our industry and actually our economy. Here, as the map that Kristen pulled up that showed the resource that we have here, and to be able to responsibly use it, and at the same time have that double effect win of being able to embody all this carbon in our buildings, in our built form, and specifically again for our driver right now in our housing, it seems like obviously a no-brainer. So one thing that we talk about a lot in our housing delivery is the continuum of needs. So not just focusing on one specific type of housing for one specific group, but actually thinking about housing as this continuum and actually delivering housing along it that is not stigmatized, that actually can reflect so that you can use the same systems and same delivery methods all the way across this. And that actually helps to, again, avoid stigmatization and make things that are more accessible. And of course, you can either swell floor plates or ramp up finishes or do different things as you move to the right. But coming up with systems that we can use in a repeatable way is really creates a big opportunity in the housing delivery, we feel. And some of our work, I think here, you can start to see that cross section that we've been able to build and continue to want to build. Another big thing, going back to that idea of looking at forestry and then how we can utilize that in the construction industry. This is a study that came out from Porsche Consulting, but obviously anyone that's been tracking any of the federal government's Canada Builds program, there's a lot of language in there right now about industrialized construction. There's a million different synonyms for it in terms, modern methods of construction, DFMA, modular, panelized, kit of parts. I mean, I could go on and on. I'm sure we all could. But one of the reasons we've tapped into this idea of industrialized construction is actually this chart right here, where it just talks about, you can see, the way that manufacturing has over the last 30 years improved its efficiency, improved its productivity for us. And when you factor in different things like trade supply and a lot of other different factors, and just generally the complexity of building and how complex it is because of real estate approvals, all these other elements that can really grind us down, our efficiency and our productivity is on this downwards trend. And that for us is a bit of a rallying cry and a call to action to say, how can we correct that? How can we start pushing it up? And for us, there is this belief that industrializing our construction processes are the key to doing that. So again, for us as architects, as designers and collaborators in this delivery of construction, we see us having major roles in the idea of productization, which again, housing, and especially housing that can be transferable across the different markets, public sector, private sector, and different communities of need. If you can start to productize that, not cookie cutter necessarily, but just start thinking about it in terms of the way that we can make products that we can design with sort of kit of parts mentality, that will then give us this a more robust rule-based design process. And then we can start coupling that and matching and pulling in and integrating all these different great prefabrication opportunities that are out there, and these resources. In the early start in the quiz where it said market readiness was a big factor in why people aren't moving forward with projects. I agree, and especially as someone who's been interested in mass timber for, again, 15, 20 years. I mean, and Stephen obviously knows, and the group on the call here, 10 years ago, there was nothing. I mean, we were really, and to see all the progress we've actually made in the last 10 years is pretty amazing. It's pretty astonishing. And it's also very exciting. But there is still, I think, this call to action for all of us to really push on these three key components. And that's something that we're definitely looking to do, and feel as though in a large degree we have. So as you can see here, these are some projects that actually the two on the far right I would consider very conventionally designed and delivered housing projects. The top right on the right is actually stick frame wood with again wood frame, again all stick frame, some minor panelization, but a very conventional delivery of a sort of mid-rise type development. The one below is affordable housing with a mix of use on the ground floor. It was, again, ICF and Course Lab, again, very conventionally delivered, but the knowledge that we have from delivering those types of conventional products allowed us to then see where we can infuse opportunities. So as you can see there, we've had experience doing full volumetric and understood and learned some of those important lessons about that. And we've also obviously got into and done a lot of stuff in the mass timber space in terms of our R&D and then our actual application. And that's what I'm going to get into now. So with our journey, again, to actually executing mass timber, some of you maybe that have seen me speak before will maybe recognize these three projects. And I always bring them up. You can see 2017, the one on the far left was completed. 2022, the one in the middle, and the one on the right was never completed. These were projects that we really thought we had opportunities to do in mass timber. We had buy-in, and for one reason or another, all of these projects did not go mass timber. Not a single piece of mass timber was part of any of these projects. But what they gave us was that knowledge and network. And that was so key in when the time did come for those opportunities to open for the industry to start having, available resources, such as, again, of course, Element 5, as most of us know, getting that plan up and running in St. Thomas. We were ready because we had gone through this process here of working through and understanding, what could be done. So, and again, the case of the project on the right, we worked on testing and worked on an NRCan grant that gave us this idea of these box beam panels that really, in terms of our fire ratings and our acoustics, we got through all of this knowledge and built this data point and the network of people who could not only help produce the product, but also who could help us design and create work plans to deliver the product and the projects. Furthermore, in terms of our housing studies and just trying to look at these, again, product-based design and how you formulaically can lay out these housing and residential suite layouts, and how then we could optimize and actually use CLT in this case, or mass timber elements, to solve challenges and problems that conventional delivery was having with either spanning or time in terms of number of picks of a core slab plank. The classic one here is we were able to cut the number of picks off of a truck by about a third, just because of the size and weight of those panels, which was great. And again, as we started to look at that and push that even further, you can see here on that first project that we were able to do, we were really starting to look at things and push boundaries on that panelization and the prefabrication offsite of as many components as possible. Once, of course, just because of the market readiness and some of the other factors on this project, all we really ended up being able to do was the mass timber package itself, not some of the other things. But those conversations and again, that network and those studies that we did back then are now informing, work and projects that ourselves and others in the industry are doing now. So leading that all to 3 projects where we actually were able to use the Rapid Housing Initiative to deliver on this promise of executing with mass timber. Here's 3 projects that we were able to use that, again, we're very excited about, particularly the one on the right and the way that these projects were able to build on each other, to the one on the right actually being a full 6-story, which even, again, 10 years ago wasn't even possible to do out of this type of construction. Now we've shown it, we've built it, and built it to basically the highest possible standard of building performance with its Passive House certification for the City of Housing Hamilton. So just some quick images that you can see. There was a conversation about the slides that we will make available for everyone, just as I try to roll through this. But you can see this was again that first project we did in Kitchener for the YWKW, the first building we did, and then on the same site, and where we really were able to ramp up and see a lot of huge efficiencies in both time and design and what have you, was on a second building on the site that utilized again the same system and layout, which we've again repeated multiple times. This is the project I mentioned in Hamilton, where again we were able to take what we had done, but then ramp it up. And because of the client who we had done so much of the things in terms of the formula, the layout, the structure, the package, that we were then just able to invest more into the envelope and other elements of the building with a client group in City Housing Hamilton who saw that value in terms of their overall residential housing portfolio that they had in the community, and the desire to be leaders in that space. So again, going back to that idea of stigmatization, the fact that we're doing supportive, affordable, even transitional housing, and giving that exposed mass timber, which is, oftentimes historically, even if you see the image, behind Kristen on her screen, that's usually considered this very high-end, luxurious product. And we feel as though to break down that stigma in that housing continuum, being able to have this be a product that's available and accessible to everyone in that continuum of need is something we're, quite frankly, really, really proud of. Very quickly here, in terms of our partnerships and lessons learned, the collaboration piece was really key. I might have lost the slide here, but that's okay. Just that idea. This basically, I have an org chart that shows, how we've delivered a lot of our projects. Many of them that have gone through the Rapid Housing Initiative funding have been actually design build, which isn't historically something that architects even really like to engage with. Usually that's the one where we get, pushed into the corner and told what to do on, industrial or car dealerships or what have you. And in this case, it's been a much different experience. Where we've come together with teams who really understood the vision for what we're trying to achieve through a mass timber delivery or a high performance building delivery. We've also worked in other models, including integrated project delivery, IPD, and are doing that still today, as well as, of course, more conventional models in terms of now that we have the experience of being able to deliver these buildings, things like CCDC2 fixed price, and obviously, as most of us are probably very, very familiar with, the 5B and the 5A construction management models, which of course, Payam, you're great at. Those are becoming, obviously great places where we can, again, build and get that early design assist, if you will, of all the players and teams. It's a really key and important important ingredient in not only mass timber, but again, just delivering on this industrialized construction. So again, one of the things that comes up a lot with wood and some of the risks associated is actually, of course, moisture control. And that's something that through the process and working with, like I was saying, that really important network, in a lot of cases, we're working with RDH or other sort of building science experts that come in and are able to be involved, be on site, and do this type of testing for moisture control. And what we've found, and this sort of is across the board, I mean, anytime you have the opportunity to trap moisture, it's bad. But that isn't, unique to mass timber. That's any building system. And so what we find, as long as we're putting the right steps in place to test and ensure that we're not trapping moisture, the product itself is working quite well. Specifically, the CLT itself has shown to be, through the moisture control, through the robustness of the product, and the controls that are put in place with moisture during fabrication, it's actually a very very high performing piece of product that doesn't actually have a lot of moisture coming in. Usually where we find bigger problems is on surface areas with plywood splines and areas throughout these projects that we're doing. So that's been beneficial. Other little lessons learned, as we're working through and learning, things like, the chamfer on a CNC cutout for a window, that all of a sudden, you got to think about your rough opening sizes and whether that needs to be modified. Again, we've come up with solutions for that over time, but only through those lessons learned that we've had. Again, the moisture control and just overall building science and the performance. The Hamilton project basically was one of the most airtight projects that RDH and our team and a lot of Passive House project had ever seen, because again, just to that robustness of the design and of the wall panel construction. Here's a picture of it here under construction. So again, with the last few minutes, I did just want to talk again and push that for us, mass timber has been, as with that understanding of conventional delivery, mass timber has come in and really solved problems. And I think that's what we all need to be looking for, is not just trying to push it or being naive and bringing it to the table, particularly from the architectural side, as well, this is this cool thing. For us, these are solving conventional problems that we're already dealing with through either its prefabrication, through its carbon sequestering, through its lightweight nature. There's a lot of different value add points that it can bring to what we find, particularly in the mid-rise space and that missing middle housing that is so needed and desired in our communities. The ability for prefabrication and that lightweight construction of mass timber or mass timber hybrids, we're just seeing huge opportunities. So we're really interested in understanding and becoming integrators of all those groups. These are all different locations throughout this country that are doing this type of industrialized construction, modern method of construction, and panelization. And I think there's a good argument that there's going to be many more of them. So our ability and our rallying cry is to really start to understand these more, to document them, to understand where the value adds are in our designs, and to integrate that seamlessly into our designs so that we can get the benefits of time, cost, and overall product value. So some of the projects we're currently working on, we've been working on a panelized CLT hybrid, where and these are on specifically the fourplex model that we've looked in for infill applications. As you can see here, doing that again on a lot of our affordable, again, to bring the cost down, that sort of balancing of panelized offsite stick frame with like Kristen showed in one of her images, which I think was a great contrast, showing the cast in place install versus this type of construction is great. Some of the work we're doing in the north where this type of product is not readily accepted, but we've actually been able, not on their structure per se, but actually on this ramping element that we did here on one of our northern projects, where the mass timber, the CLT plank, was actually by far the best solution to this challenge we had of creating that sloping. And now that's that sort of planting the flag of mass timber in the north, which we're really excited about continuing to explore. We're continuing to do, again, push on those height limitations with 8-story and 12-story designs, which are now, again, completely code compliant. And you can see how we're also then able to do that along with some of our adaptive reuse work that, again, is so important in terms of establishing and maintaining the communities we live in. And of course, right now as well with Build Canada and Build Now, there are these opportunities coming for large land developments that can deploy a lot of housing through large investment and collaboration on both the public and private side. And we do see our role and our ability to build these typologies and have them be done out of industrialized construction methods really champion that. So we're excited to move all that stuff forward. And that is time.
I was just going to say, you made it right on top within 5 seconds margin. Thank you very much, both of you. If anyone needs to jump off, we will be sharing the replay and the slides probably within the next 24 hours. You'll receive an email with a link. For those of you who want to stick around, and if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to type in. We can probably stick around for another 5-10 minutes, maybe, and answer some questions. My takeaway and my 5 top bullet points, which I think was also resonated with Kristen and Matt's conversation, was 1, mass timber is great. It's not the silver bullet that's going to solve all of the problems that we've been dealing for many years. It's one of the solutions. It's a very good solution. It has very good potential of solving a whole bunch of traditional problems, but it is one of the options. Think of it that way, please. Kristen talked about schedule. I would want to emphasize the holistic approach to schedule. Is for anyone who's ever worked on a construction site, the savings on the schedule can go very easily to waste if some of your other trades don't perform. So it's a matter of holistic approach, making sure you have bottlenecks figured out and making sure they work together. The design perspective, again, I would advocate for the IPD approach, considering how much learning is involved, how much variance and differences and nuances are included in the design process for this product. IPD would be my suggested method. And please think about the learning curve situation. At the end of the day, this is a learning curve we're all on, as Matt mentioned and Kristen mentioned, like we're learning as we go from one project to the other. So it would be very important to account for that when you're doing your budget. Last but not least, use mass timber to strengths. Don't use it where it's not very strong. You have other material that are stronger that can fill that void. And with that, I would say I think we're done. I don't see too many questions. Oh, sorry, there's one question. How do you see the lack of production supply affecting the implementation of mass timber? I don't know, Matt or Kristen, do you want to take that?
I'm happy to jump in here just because I recently completed that study. And what we found is that there's actually a lot of available capacity within manufacturers to create more panels and increase their production. Really, it's sort of the lack of standardization across jurisdictions that is causing them a lot of troubles, and then lack of less demand than they would like. And the more demand that they would see, actually the lower their costs would be to you, because they're having to pay for the same space, the same overhead, machinery, etc. It's just over fewer projects. So yeah, I would say that there's actually a fair amount of supply capacity. It's just they need sort of the incentive to make it right.
That's very good. Okay, I think we're good, everyone. If you have any suggestions for our future webinars, please feel free to put it in chat or send us an email. With that, if there's anything else to add, Matt or Kristen, please add. If not, we're going to sign off.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.